Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's ECM. This is Resistance Live for the 22nd of March, 2024. And I'm just going to tell you all that my list of items to discuss today is perhaps longer than it has been in months. So we have an enormous amount to cover today, in part because there's ongoing breaking news on the Hill on top of everything else that was already on my list. But we're going to move forward and we're going to get as much done on it as possible. And we're going to start with Tish James. Okay, first things first, I'm coming to you as always from occupied, unceded Tongva territory, also known as Southern California. And today for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a white sleeveless turtleneck sweater with my hair down, my big gold hoops in. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I'm in front of my plant and my cushy chair and my lamp. And I'm glad you're all here. Yesterday, we had 58,000 views on yesterday's broadcast, which was crazy. So we have a lot of new followers here. I want to thank you all for joining us. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this broadcast and to subscribe. All right. So first things first. Yesterday, Tish James filed 2 liens in New York State against 2 major Trump properties. One of them being Trump's golf course in Westchester, which is the county right north of New York City. And then also in regards to his Seven Springs estate. Seven Springs being one of the major properties that was the subject of devaluation discussions during the New York civil fraud case. Now, I want everybody to understand how this works, because liens are only the first step legally to being able to seize the property. The way that this works in New York is as follows. First of all, the judgment has already been entered in New York City. So one of the things that means is that Tish James doesn't actually have to issue liens on any of Trump's properties that exist inside New York City itself. All right, it's automatic because the judgment is what's called domesticated already. So that means that there are already judgment liens attaching to anything. And I mean, this is a big deal. Anything that Trump owns in New York City itself. Now, I have to remind you all that Trump doesn't own very much of Trump Tower anymore. But it's not just the properties that are the issue, right? There's also a whole slew of other Trump properties in New York City, which we don't need to go in front of. Like when I spoke at the Me Too March, it was in front of Trump International, which sits right off Columbus Circle. There's a bunch of other properties that could be at issue inside New York City itself. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind here is that because the judgment originated in New York City, it also attaches to any bank accounts that Trump may have in New York City itself. And that means that come Monday, if Trump doesn't make the bond, Tish James can freeze his bank accounts that are located in New York City. And that means that he's not going to have access to cash. All right. So this can all go fairly quickly from here on out. And honestly, while the seizure of the properties is a very big deal, honestly, from the standpoint of all of Trump's mythology and everything else, the lack of access to bank accounts is fundamentally a much bigger deal in terms of his day-to-day ability to do anything. And from that standpoint, I'm actually more excited about the bank accounts than I kind of am about the property. The property is going to be fun, don't get me wrong, but the bank accounts being frozen and liquidated to satisfy the judgment is going to be a very, very, very big deal. Now, I'm going to talk about Truth Social in a minute because I know there's a lot of questions this morning on the Patreon feed. By the way, I'm going to remind everybody, you got questions for me, you can head on over to the link that's about to come around again, patreon.com/resistance live, and become a paid subscriber for as little as $2 a month. You get to ask me questions before every broadcast. Tons of questions about Truth Social. Just hang on to that for a minute because I got a lot to say about it. I want people to understand, though, that, Tish James's seizure of assets does not just limit itself to New York State, okay? Because there is a process that can be used nationwide called, again, as I just mentioned, domesticating judgments. What this means essentially is that Tish James has to bring, let's just say hypothetically, the judgment against him in the New York civil fraud case to Florida and file a particular set of court papers to quote unquote domesticate the judgment. Once the judgment is domesticated in Florida, she can seize assets located there. Anybody want to think about what that might look like? Now, I said on Truth Social, we're getting to that, on Threads the other day, also that she could seize the jet. So here's the thing. If the jet happens to land in New York City anytime soon, she can slap a lien on it. if the jet is technically located or like, domesticated in Florida, she domesticates the judgment in Florida, she gets to slap a lien on the jet. And then what happens is essentially the equivalent of a foreclosure proceeding, where there is an execution on the lien, the property goes into foreclosure, and it's sold at auction by the state. That is going to be the next steps for the properties that already have liens against them, whether that's New York City automatically or Seven Springs and the Westchester Golf Course, which she's now put liens against completely. So this process is going to take a little bit of time to play out with regard to the properties, but she is moving forward on this. Make no mistake about it. The fact that the liens have already been issued is a statement that the judgment is going to attach to those properties. And, I called it yesterday on Threads. I'm just going to say this. I do not think it's going to be terribly long before Trump Tower is not named Trump Tower any longer. And all of this is the reason why Trump is just absolutely losing it all over the place on Truth Social in the last 24 hours. Now, I want to talk for a second about Truth Social because I know everybody's like up in arms about this morning, and it's really key to understand how this works. Okay, so there's a company called Digital World, which is a SPAC. We talked about this before on the broadcast many times over the last year since Truth Social began. A SPAC, I'm going to remind everybody here, one of the things that I did when I was a federal court trial lawyer for 15 years was securities law. That was actually like my niche specialization. And then I did like human rights and civil rights cases pro bono on the side. Here's the way that this works. A SPAC is a special purpose acquisition corporation. Its whole reason for being is to acquire a company, all right? So Digital World has been in the process of trying to acquire Truth Social for quite some time. There was an SEC investigation, however, because there were concerns about Digital World being used as a money laundering operation. I still have very big questions about this, by the way, because a lot of what's happening in the financing around this deal doesn't make any sense. All right. So lo and behold, this morning, Digital World, which is a publicly traded company on the stock exchange, their board voted to approve the merger with Truth Social. Do you know what happened to Digital World stock the second that vote took place? It plummeted. You should go look at the graphs this morning. I have done this. The graphs this morning for Digital World on the stock exchange, because it is like a straight red line all the way down from the moment that the vote was approved. Why is this the case? Well, let me explain a couple of things about the valuation of Truth Social. Here are the facts. Truth Social is losing tens of millions of dollars in money a month. In the last 9 months, they have brought in only $3.3 million in revenue. Now, while there is all this stuff floating around and, this deal is being described as a $3.5 billion deal to benefit Donald Trump, what people need to understand about this is that that money is not real, okay? It is a paper valuation. And one of the things that this acquisition has, which people should also understand, is something called a lockup provision. What is a lockup provision? Well, essentially a lockup provision is a clause in an acquisition contract that prevents the primary owners of Truth Social from selling any shares for 6 months. So what this means is that absent a board action, Trump can't sell any of the stock that he is being given through this merger for at least 6 months, okay? The other thing that's going to happen here, and I'm just telling you guys this, I'm just like calling it, all right, is that as soon as Truth Social starts to trade on the stock exchange on Monday morning, the share valuation, just like exactly what happened with Digital World this morning, is going to drop like a rock. Okay. And what that is going to mean is that the valuation of Trump's stock is going to be in the toilet. I'm going to remind everybody, I litigated against Donald Trump. We don't talk about this a lot here, but I was involved in the third Atlantic City bankruptcy case against him. It was an adversary proceeding in bankruptcy, which is essentially a litigation in a bankruptcy where people who are owed money are fighting over who should get it first. All right. I can tell you something about what happens with Trump's publicly. Sorry. Sometimes I just have to laugh, you guys, because it's, I know that to everybody else who's sort of like out there, this all looks like very scary, but this is one reason why I'm here, because I want to explain to all of you, like, how this is really not what it looks like. All right. What happened with Donald Trump's publicly traded Trump hotels and casinos is that it ended up as a penny stock. Okay. What that means is that it is the value dropped so much, okay, that you could buy the stock for less than a penny. All right. He does not do well with publicly traded entities. Why? Because just like was the case with all of his assets in the New York civil fraud case, this asset is wildly overvalued. A company that is losing tens of millions of dollars a month and has only brought in $3.3 million of revenue in the last 9 months is not worth $3.5 billion. And lots of folks, including securities lawyers like myself, by the way, George Conway used to be one also. Both of us used to be big New York Wall Street lawyers back in the day, have very serious questions about this valuation, including whether or not like the allegations of money laundering that have been sort of hovering around digital world since this whole thing began might be in play here. But let me just say one thing, all right? This is not like somebody handing Donald Trump $3.5 billion for an acquisition. This is literally just on paper. This is what someone like an appraiser is saying the company is worth. And that appraiser, by the way, I don't know, man. I would be a little concerned about my future as an appraiser if I had given an appraisal that looked like this on this company. I am just going to tell you all that my bet is that whatever Trump looks like on paper now, by the time we get to the close of the stock exchange on Monday afternoon, it's going to be a lot less. And I also want people to understand that unless the board of Truth Social, now granted, I have to like share with you guys, it's not like the Truth Social board is independent, okay? Like Don Jr. is on it, Kash Patel is on it. They could vote at like arguably to let Trump sell some of his shares in advance. But I'm just going to say this, all right? It would be a very shady, closely held transaction, and it would raise some eyebrows inside the SEC. And I personally don't think that this Truth Social merger is going to give Trump anything like the exit that he thinks it will in terms of the bond in the New York civil fraud case. So I want everybody to just understand this, all right? Like, this is not what it looks like. He is not suddenly going to have $3.5 billion in cash on hand. In fact, he has like no cash on hand. And we're going to talk about that in a minute because Tish James got permission to file a SIR reply brief this morning. And you all should know what that means. It's a wild morning. I'm just telling you guys, it's like a wild morning here in terms of all this stuff. And I'm really glad I can make it clear for all of you, but it's like, it's wild. It's truly, truly wild. Okay, so let's talk for a second about what is actually happening now in the New York civil fraud case, because there are two developments in the last 24 hours that are very significant. The first is that Judge Engoron, who was the judge who oversaw the New York civil fraud case, has given the person who is overseeing the assets of the Trump organization and all the other LLCs and companies that were wrapped up in the New York civil fraud case more significant authority than she has had before, okay? And what this essentially has done is put the day-to-day operations of the Trump organization under the approval of the receiver. Now, she already had to be consulted if Trump wanted to move any money around. Like there was a limit on that. I think it was like $500,000. If any money was going to move in and out of Trump organization or between any of these companies or between any of the defendants, she had to be asked permission to move that money. Now, all of the day-to-day operations of the Trump organization are under her control. So essentially, the result of this action is that Trump has been divested, and Junior and Eric and everyone else, Weisselberg, have been divested of the ability to do anything whatsoever with the Trump organization. Now, why is this significant? Well, there's one other aspect of this receivership that people should be aware of, which is that to execute on the judgment from the New York civil fraud case, one of the things that Tish James is allowed to do is redirect rent. And a number of these buildings that are owned by Donald Trump charge rent. Okay, some of them also charge membership fees. And because the receiver is now in charge of the day-to-day operations of the Trump organization, she now is the person who is going to decide what happens on a day-to-day basis with the money inside the Trump org and all the other related companies. It also means, by the way, that Tish James is going to get that money. All the money that would ordinarily be flowing into the Trump organization as a result of any regularly recurring income revenue is now going to be redirected to the state of New York. So all of this is like huge. It's like this is like the end of the Trump organization and the Trump empire as we know it. Like it's over. And unless, and I don't think this is going to happen, someone steps in to save him, and I'm going to just say something, the risk is too great. We talked about this earlier on the broadcast this week. The Uniform Code of Commercial Conduct requires, for the UCC, as it's known, requires public filings of people who put up in essence, their own name or their own assets to secure a bond in New York State. No one is going to want to be associated with this. No one's going to want to have anything to do with it. Okay. So the likelihood here that there is going to be anybody stepping up to save him, especially because he's going to lose on appeal, right, means that come Monday, Tish James can take it all, or at least start taking it all. Okay. So this is all a very big deal. Okay. Now I want to talk about the SIR reply for 1 second. So just so everybody understands what a SIR reply brief is. One of the things that, okay, that person's going, bye. Whoops. Anybody who questions the need for pronouns in this day and age can just like vanish from the feed. All right. One of the things that people should also be aware of is the way that SIR replies work. So when a motion or an appeal is filed, there is a briefing sequence that takes place, okay? You file an opening brief, then the other side files a brief in opposition, then there is an opportunity for a reply brief, and sometimes there's an opportunity for what's called a SIR reply with permission, which is like a fourth brief, okay? So here what we had was Trump filing an appeal to say, I don't have the money for the bond and I shouldn't have to pay it. Tish James opposes that. That happened earlier this week. Then there's a reply brief filed by Donald Trump. Then lastly, Tish James asked for a SIR reply, all right? And she got it. So the SIR reply brief is now being filed, all right? And it's actually like now officially filed. And one of the things that Tish James is pointing out in the SIR reply brief is that it shouldn't be hard for him to get a bond if the things that he is spouting off about all over the place are actually true. So let's just take, for example, this morning. Trump is over on Truth Social saying he has $500 million in cash. I'm just going to tell you all, I think that's a lie. Like, I don't think there's any legitimate way that he has $500 million in cash, because then he wouldn't have had any trouble putting up the bond. Right? Any one of these 30 companies that he went to would have said, fine, put up your cash as collateral, just like you put up your Schwab brokerage account as collateral for the E. Jean Carroll bond, and we'll certify your bond and you can proceed with your appeal. He doesn't have that money, but I'm going to say something about how this all goes, all right? He has now claimed to the appellate division in New York State that he doesn't have the money to put up the bond. Simultaneously on Truth Social, he's saying, but I have $500 million in cash. This is one of those moments where like his lawyers have got to be running around like with their hair on fire, because essentially what he's done by saying that is undercut their entire argument that the bond should not have to be posted. If he is claiming that he has $500 million, then he should be able to post the bond. And if he doesn't post the bond, then Tish James should be able to execute on the judgment as soon as she wants. So I'm just going to tell you all like the reality here, okay? The reality is that Donald Trump is broke. And we know that not just because of the fact that he can't find anybody to help him certify a bond. We also know it because of this deal that he has cut with the RNC. So we got to talk about this morning because this is actually very good news for all of us on the other side of the fence. All right. Like, I want everybody to kind of like understand how this all works. All right. And I know we've got a lot of new followers here. I'm just going to tell you, like, we are a conspiracy theory free zone on this broadcast. So we're not going to spend a lot of time claiming, you know, like where his money has gone or whether or not there's nonsense buried in Ivana's coffin. We don't do that here. What we deal with is facts and evidence and law. All right. But I want to tell you all that, you know, like the circumstantial evidence about Trump being broke has never been more apparent than it is in terms of what's happening with the RNC. So there is a deal that has now been cut with the RNC that any money that the RNC raises for purposes of this election cycle, Donald Trump gets a chunk off the top, and not a small chunk. It gets diverted to his super PAC, which can then use that money for his legal bills. Okay. As of yesterday, the RNC has less money on hand. Sorry. I'm sorry. Like, I have my own moments of just like, who would have guessed, kind of crazy pants moments about this where I can't do anything but laugh. The RNC has less cash money on hand than the now defunct campaign of Nikki Haley. And one of the things that means is that if like a huge chunk of every dollar raised by the RNC gets routed to Trump's super PAC, that money isn't going where it needs to go for the 2024 election, most specifically to down ballot candidates. All right. So I'm going to talk about how this impacts all of us as organizers and mobilizers and like people who care about democracy in just a minute. But just remember this. All right. If they don't have the money, they can't run effective campaigns. And we have, in contrast, Biden having like $155 million on hand in the Biden Victory Fund, right? That's on top of what the DNC is raising, which is an enormous amount of money. So I'm going to talk for a second about how this all impacts the 2024 election cycle, because it's very big news and it impacts you where you live. All right. So stick a pin in that, but I'm going to come back to it in a minute because I want to talk about just a couple of other things here. All right. Somebody asked a really good question over on the Patreon feed. Again, you want to ask me questions in advance of every broadcast, you can head on over to patreon.com/resistance live and become a paid subscriber for as little as $2 a month. That's less than a dime a broadcast, because I'm here 5 days a week, plus a bonus broadcast for our Patreon subscribers in the form of Progressive Coffee Hour, which is every Sunday morning. You should go do that. It's like really fun over there. All right. But one of the things that, let me grab the troll. Hang on. Where'd she go? Let's get her. Here we go. Bye. Okay. It's always fun to snag the trolls in real time while you're live streaming. It's just like a great bit of joy. All right. Okay. So let's just talk for a second about this question that was asked on the Patreon feed. I was asked to discuss what the intent requirement is for the retention of classified documents. So those of you who have been here for the last 7 years have heard me talk about one of the elements of criminal law a lot, namely what is called mens rea. All right. This is a Latin term, legalese, that stands for essentially the mental state that is required to prove a given crime. Okay. Here, one of the things that has to be proven against Donald Trump for the NARA violations is that he willfully retained documents that he was not entitled to. Okay. So willfulness would be the mens rea, the required mental state that that has to be proven against Donald Trump beyond a reasonable doubt in order for him to be convicted in the classified documents case. All right. Now, we're not going to talk about Judge Cannon today. We talked about her law clerks yesterday. We spent a lot of time on Judge Cannon this week. We're only talking about the crimes alleged. Okay. This is a different standard, okay, than what is applied in other crimes, okay? So like a negligence standard, if you were alleging a negligent, let's just say involuntary manslaughter, all right? That would be a crime where you killed someone essentially by accident. Maybe you were negligent in the way that you were driving your car, but you did not intentionally run someone over with your vehicle. All right. So that's one way of understanding how mental state, mens rea, how mental states for different crimes can differ. All right. The reason why this is relevant here is because for all the people who are like, why wasn't Joe Biden, I don't like to spend time arguing with the cult, but let's just for the sake of argument, do this. Why wasn't Joe Biden indicted for having classified documents in his garage? Well, he didn't willfully retain them. It was accidental. He didn't even know they were there. And, some of those notes were some of those documents were his personal notes from the time that he was the vice president. He did not intentionally retain documents. When he was asked to return them, he did. And that therefore means that the required mental state could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law against President Biden. All right. It was an accident, right? Very, very different from Donald Trump being told by the National Archives that he wasn't allowed to have the documents, not giving them back. Being notified by the DOJ that he needed to return them, not giving them back, finding out that the FBI was going to drop in Mar-a-Lago, intentionally having his staff move those documents from one location to a locked closet where the FBI could not get in. Okay, all of this goes to willfulness, right? He intentionally retained materials to which he was not entitled. Okay, so again, I have to say to everybody who's here who has, been here for a very, very long time, that usually when you're trying a case, you want to be 3 deep. And we've talked about this a lot in terms of evidentiary proof. You want to have at least 3 forms of proof for every element of your case or the crime that's being alleged here, okay? I'm just going to tell you all that there is so much evidence of Donald Trump's mens rea in terms of his mental state, retaining documents to which he was not entitled, that Jack Smith's team is not going to have any trouble making out that element of the crime. Question is, are we ever going to get to trial in the Southern District of Florida? Yeah, we will, but it's not, I'm not counting on it happening anytime soon. And that in and of itself is something that should give everyone confidence that eventually he's going to be convicted. All right. Okay. One other question that we had here goes back to something that has been discussed on the broadcast with regard to Trump's bankruptcy. So I want to clear something up here because I've said before, and this remains true, that the damages from intentional torts, we've talked about this here quite a bit, okay? Torts are like injuries against other people, all right? Defamation is an intentional tort, okay? Fraud intentional tort, okay? And I said earlier on the broadcast that, like you do your first semester in law school, you have a whole class called torts, and it relates to people falling down on sidewalks or being poisoned by drugs or like all sorts of other things that can happen to you in the form of personal injury, all right? Judgments from intentional torts cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. What does that mean? That means a bankruptcy judge cannot wipe the slate clean and say, you don't owe that money anymore. What can happen, however, if Donald Trump were to pursue personal bankruptcy is a delay. All right. And I know how we all feel about delays. Every time we talk about this, I'm so tired of delays. Why is the justice system moving so slowly? Okay, look, I'm just going to tell you all, there's no way for Trump to get out of this judgment. And then on top of it, there's a difference between the bankruptcies, like the one that I was involved in litigating against Donald Trump, versus a personal bankruptcy. A personal bankruptcy for Donald Trump is a narcissistic injury, which he's not going to allow that to take place. Like, I just want to tell everybody, like, dude is a malignant narcissist with sociopathic tendencies. For him to declare personal bankruptcy would be an admission that he is broke. And he's not going to do that. Instead, he's running around on Truth Social this morning claiming he has $500 million in cash and undercutting his appeal to claim that he shouldn't have to put up bond to begin with. Okay. So he's not declaring bankruptcy. All right. Nobody needs to worry about this to begin with. Corporate, maybe. But even if the corporation declares bankruptcy, that's not going to stop the assessment and the Tish James putting liens against his personal bank accounts. He's a personal defendant in that case, not just the Trump organization, but Donald Trump and Jr. and Eric and Weisselberg and everybody else. They're personal defendants. They're individual defendants. So she's going to go after his stuff in his name, even if the Trump organization declares bankruptcy. So I'm just like, not worried about this. Okay. I'm not worried about it. And I know some people are like, ooh, bankruptcy could give him a way out. Well, the only way it gives him a way out is if it gives him a delay to get somebody to give him the money. And I'm just going to tell you all, if nobody's going to give Donald Trump the money in 30 days, no one's giving Donald Trump the money. So buckle up. Okay. I have to say, one of the other questions was like, will someone swoop in to rescue Donald Trump? I think I've said enough about that this morning on the broadcast. Like, I don't really feel the need to kind of like add on to it. I just don't see it coming. And, it's going to be public if it does happen. And who wants to be associated with him at this point, right? Not to mention that you're putting your own money on the line, which you're probably going to get screwed out of in the end because he doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of winning. I just don't think so. All right. For those who have just logged in here, I want you all to go back and watch the portion of this broadcast where I talked about the fact that the Truth Social merger is not what it looks like. Okay. Former securities fraud lawyer here. He's not getting $3.5 billion. Go back and watch what I said earlier in the broadcast. Okay. Someone asked a question this morning about the UN Security Council resolution. So yesterday, for the first time, the United States put forward a resolution in front of the UN Security Council calling for an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza. And this is a big deal. Okay. Like, I'm a little disturbed actually about the way in which this is sort of like flown under the radar, because so many folks, and, we've talked about this from time to time on this broadcast as well, have been demanding that the Biden administration call for a ceasefire. This was a call for an unqualified ceasefire. Okay. Immediate and sustained ceasefire. It was vetoed this morning in the UN Security Council by China and Russia. Now, I was asked to comment on this. So I'm just going to say this, you all know that quite a number of the cases that I was involved in on a human rights level were international cases with international implications. I just have to ask everyone, why do China and Russia not want a ceasefire? Okay. Like, really, I want people to think about this at the 30,000 foot level. Why would China and Russia not want a ceasefire? Why would they not want a ceasefire in relation to the United States putting forward this resolution? Anybody have a guess? Because I'm going to tell you why, okay? Because there is a great degree of disinformation floating around right now, and a lot of this kind of like quote unquote genocide Joe stuff originated from sources outside the United States that are extremely questionable. Who does it benefit? Okay, if there is a capacity to still tag the Biden administration somehow with Netanyahu's genocide, who does it benefit? Right? It benefits Vladimir Putin, right? It benefits the folks in China who want to undermine US democracy. So people need to like really pay attention to this on like a multi-tiered level, all right? Because it's not just about what's happening per se inside the UN Security Council. It's about much larger issues related to the 2024 election. And I want everyone to be like really thoughtful about the way that you discuss this, because China and Russia did not need to do that, right? We could have had an immediate ceasefire where all those starving children in Gaza would get food. And they decided to veto it because it's in their own interests to make sure that President Biden continues to be unfairly tagged with this, as opposed to like Netanyahu, who is Israel's Trump. All right. So folks should look at this from a much higher level. All right. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. Okay. Ronna Romney McDaniel, former head of the RNC, ousted at Trump's insistence, notwithstanding the fact that she changed her name so that it wasn't associated with Mitt Romney anymore. You know, this is just a warning to everybody. Everything that Trump touches dies. I'm not the first person to say that, but she has now been hired by NBC. So I'm just going to say one thing about this. Corporate media is corporate media. And one of the reasons why, like, what I do here and what a number of other folks who are independent commentators do is so significant is because we are not living under the umbrella of the corporate media structure, which does things like this. All right. So one of the reasons why I come on here and I ask you guys to become paid subscribers, and lots of you all the time are like, I would love to see you on Rachel. Why can't you have your own show on MSNBC? It's really nice that you say that, but I'm going to tell you something. If I was on MSNBC, I wouldn't be able to talk like this. And so one of the things that folks need to be thoughtful about in terms of who you support, who you subscribe to on YouTube, who you follow on social media, is who is allowed to be independent and who isn't. Okay. NBC and MSNBC hiring Romney McDaniel is really problematic. And it's not the first time that they've done it. I mean, some of you may not remember this, but Greta Van Susteren used to have Ari Melber's slot on MSNBC not all that long ago. And she was hired straight off of Fox News. It's not the first time that they've tried this. Now, do I think that Ronna Romney McDaniel is going to be long for this world on MSNBC? Probably not, okay? Just like Greta. But I am going to say this, all right? You should be aware that a lot of what's happening in mainstream media right now is designed for clicks. They want conflict. They want to game this out like it's a horse race right now in the 2024 election. When in fact, what we're seeing and what we all know is that we have like Joe Biden over here, which we may not agree with on everything, but he's a good guy, right? He's out there trying to make the country better. He believes in public service, right? Our job is to elect the most responsible candidate who is most closely aligned with our values and then push them in the direction that we want them to go. It's Joe Biden versus like dementia-addled, malignant narcissist with sociopathic tendencies, 91 times indicted, right? Facing down 4 criminal trials, broke dude, huge national security risk. This is not a horse race, right? This is like the possibility of democracy surviving and maybe becoming something extraordinary. More on that in a minute. And fascism, autocracy, the end of America. Like, that's the choice, right? So I don't need to hear from Ronna Romney McDaniel, and neither does anybody else. All right. But you should just take it as a sign that a lot of what's happening, even on places like MSNBC, is designed for clicks. Okay. Little bit of breaking news on the Hill this morning. I have to say this one, I can't, you guys, I don't even know. Those of you who rode with me here through, through the last round of the speakers votes, when we had the whole fiasco of Matt Gaetz ousting Kevin McCarthy. And then we had like, is it Jim Jordan? Is it like, somebody else? Who are we going to throw up here? Let's have a whole bunch of votes. All of the House is non-functional for weeks at a time. This morning, Marjorie Taylor Greene, because Speaker Mike Johnson did not shut down the government, has put a motion on the floor to vacate the speaker's seat. So here we are again with like the ultra far right caucus in the GOP eating one of their own. Now, is Mike Johnson going to be Speaker of the House by like Monday? It's anybody's guess. I'm just going to tell you all though, Ken Buck is gone and the House majority has shrunk to like a tiny fraction. And I personally am waiting for like Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries. All it would take is like, I think 3 Republicans deciding that they were done with the chaos for us to take back control of the House. So I don't really think that like anyone should be disturbed by this. Like, yes, it's going to be chaotic. Yes, it's not good. Yes, we have a looming government shutdown and like a funding bill that like everybody's arguing over these tiny little things in it, that most of which are like far right-wing policies that nobody wants. But I'm just going to say this. All right. The more chaos there is in the GOP, the better it is for us in 2024. All right. Okay, that brings me to my final point of the day. This morning on Threads, I talked about the fact that we actually right now have a tremendous opportunity in light of this deal between the RNC and Trump that I talked about earlier in the broadcast. Because what it means is that there is not going to be any money for down ballot races. Okay. And as we've talked about here on the broadcast for, like at least the last 4 years, one of the things that we have to keep an eye on is that the state legislatures and even local races are where the fascists really have their foot on the gas. Every anti-trans bill that's being passed is being passed in red state legislatures, okay? Every 15-week abortion ban or flat out abortion ban is being passed in state legislatures. All the efforts to undertake gun control and gun safety legislation, all you have to do is look at Tennessee's House, where, the Justins are currently really still at war with the far right white Republican Speaker of the House. All of that is, again, a sign of where fascism is making inroads. All right. The good news about this for us is that if there is no money for down ballot races, whether that is the House, the Senate, or local races, state and local races, because of all of Trump's grifting and all of his crimes and all of his sucking the air out of the room for everything in the GOP, that actually is a tremendous opportunity for us. And I want everybody to start thinking about what would happen if we had progressive Democrats running for every seat in America right now. There was a poll, by the way, that Run for Something, many of you are familiar with them, that they did in the last couple of days that showed that between 50 to 60% of young voters are going to be more likely to vote this year if there is a progressive younger candidate on the ticket. If there is no funding for Republican candidates, and there's no funding for television ads, and there's no funding for a ground game, and there's no funding for campaign staff, guess who gets to make that up? Us, people on our side of the fence. And I see this honestly as truly a once in a generation, if not a once in a lifetime opportunity to truly remake the way that this country functions. Because places like Nashville have an opportunity to flip blue. Gloria Johnson is running for the Senate in Tennessee against Marsha Blackburn. Country music stars, left, right, and center. Maren Morris gave a statement yesterday, very raunchy statement, about how Marsha Blackburn is destroying Tennessee. Okay. There is a huge opportunity right now to flip seats from red to blue in locations where these candidates aren't going to have any money. And we've really got to see ourselves from the standpoint of participatory democracy and U.S. citizens who participate in all of this, and not even just citizens in some instances, because, we need mobilization even from people who are undocumented and people who are immigrants. And, we need everybody working toward this. But we have to recognize that what happens next is up to us. Okay. So if you live in a red state and you think all is lost, I beg to differ. And I want to encourage you to get involved where you live. Join your Indivisible chapter, join your Red, Wine, and Blue chapter. Make sure you're writing postcards to voters. Make sure but more even more significantly than that, you've got to be engaged in deep canvassing strategies. You need to be talking to your friends and your neighbors and everybody that you come across in your life about the importance of voting in this election, and not from a place of fear, right? Yes, we have to defeat Trump and we have to defeat a fascist movement in this country. There's no question about it. But people are motivated when they are disinterested or disaffected to get to the polls because they think what they're voting for is going to improve their lives. And if you can just hang your hat on one local candidate who, for instance, stands for managing traffic where you live, which is how Donica Rome became the first transgender elected official in the state of Virginia. She ran on traffic in Northern Virginia, right? This is how it gets done. You find the local issue that matters to people, and you talk about how a candidate that you care about is going to support that person's life and their values and what they want for themselves. Because after that, people start to vote blue up and down the ticket. Okay. And it's so critically important that we all focus on what we can do where we live right now, because every single one of us can make a difference. And if you're not actually volunteering, you're just oh, I'm just going to show up and vote. You're actually not doing enough this year. This is an opportunity that we've kind of been gifted, right? This is a chance to actually toss the GOP on its ass for generations if we don't lose sight of the goal. if we don't make sure that, like, you know, we got to keep our eyes on the prize, in the words of that great old spiritual, right? We've got to absolutely keep our eyes on what is possible here and get to work. Like, we cannot just sit back and, you know, be screen warriors and not get involved. So my plea to all of you today, especially to our new viewers here, we had like huge new followers here on the YouTube channel yesterday, is to please get involved where you live. Just sign up for one thing, sign up for one canvassing shift, sign up to text bank, you know, sign up to do something for your Democratic Party, be a poll watcher, sign up to be an election monitor. Do something along those lines so that you are participating to make sure that not only democracy survives, but that, like, we can actually maximize on this opportunity to build a better, more equitable, more just nation. Like, we can't lose it. We can't lose this opportunity that's been presented to us. Okay, if you have not yet subscribed to this channel here on YouTube, go hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification so that you know whenever I go live. Make sure you thumbs up this broadcast, because that helps with getting all of this great information out here. And if you are not yet a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistance-live, head on over there and join us for as little as $2 a month. Those subscriptions go all the way up to $100, but $2 a month is less than a dime a broadcast, and you get to ask me questions and join us for Progressive Coffee Hour. It's awesome. And the community is great. It's like lovely people who are all on the same side of things. So hop on over there and do that. And then lastly, I haven't mentioned this yet today, but I'm just going to mention it here really quickly. We do have this upcoming program called Truth or Fiction, run through the Gaia Leadership Project, which is my company where I do my day job. And it is a program on how to combat disinformation in real time in this era to help protect democracy, and how to become media literate so that you know if what you're looking at is legitimate or not, and you know how to deal with disinformation when you encounter it. You can sign up for that. Class starts April 15th. That has a whole community attached to it. It's going to be lovely, but you can sign up at GaiaLeadershipProject.com/truth-or-fiction. I hope you will join us. There are payment plans available. All right. I will catch you all here on Monday. If you are not a Patreon subscriber, if you are a Patreon subscriber, Progressive Coffee Hour is Sunday morning as usual, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 Eastern. We'll talk about whatever you want. And I will wish you all a good weekend. But, you know, it's Friday in Trump land, so we may have a need for an emergency broadcast after this. I don't know. We'll see. If we do, I'll see you later on today. And in the meantime, I will be watching Speaker Mike Johnson very closely for my own entertainment. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend. I'll catch you all soon. Take care.